Today we have a juicy story, a story that would dominate social media if it took place today, as it became one of the biggest scandals of all time. Two enormously famous actresses from the 1950s who were seemingly best friends until one deceived the other. This is the story of Elizabeth Taylor versus Debbie Reynolds. Before we get started, please do not forget to subscribe and at least flirt with that like button before hitting it. Thanks for watching and enjoy. The year is 1940 in Hollywood, California, under the roof of MGM Studios. Debbie Reynolds is the new girl that has just been signed under contract for MGM. As she walks across the set, she can barely believe what she is seeing. The Elizabeth Taylor has just entered the room and is walking right up to her. Elizabeth was already accomplished at this time and already had begun making a name for herself. Both 17-year-old women smile at each other and shake hands. The girls start attending school together on the lot of MGM Studios, and the start of a lifetime friendship would begin. So the majority of you probably already know who both of these women are. I'm going to give you a brief summary just in case. We will begin starting with Miss Elizabeth Rosalind Taylor, who was born on February 27th of 1932 in northwest London. Elizabeth was now flourishing into a young woman, and her beauty was stunning and very evident. She had dark black raven hair and striking eyes surrounded by dark, thick lashes. Elizabeth actually had a double layer of lashes, which is a genetic mutation. Out of all the genetic mutations you can get, double lashes, that one I would gladly take. Elizabeth's eye color was also a hot topic because while sometimes they appeared to be blue, they would also appear violet in color under certain lights. Elizabeth got her start as a child actress, appearing in films like Lassie Come Home, National Velvet, and Little Women. Elizabeth was now signed under a 7-year contract with MGM Studios after being dropped from Universal. By her teen and young adult years, MGM really began trying to make Elizabeth appear more mature and sophisticated. This is when she realized her childhood was over, as almost every aspect of her life was taken over by the studio. By the 1950s, Elizabeth would really shine and begin her stardom, being cast in a classy but elegant image. During her later years, she was known for her many films such as Cleopatra, Suddenly Last Summer, Father of the Bride, Cat on a Tin Roof, and A Place in the Sun. Elizabeth was officially a star. She was the hot topic of every magazine and gossip column. They ate her up with a spoon, and she kept giving them bite after bite. While Elizabeth Taylor had come to the scene with a dark and seductive aura to her, Debbie Reynolds was the complete opposite. Both women were breathtakingly beautiful, but they were night and day. Debbie was a strawberry blonde with a kind of sparkling eyes and always had a smile on her face, a sugary, sweet type of girl that was seen as the girl next door. Debbie would eventually be known as America's sweetheart. Debbie was born under the name Mary Frances Reynolds on April 1st of 1932 in El Paso, Texas. Her family grew up very poor, and her mother would offer laundry services to scrape whatever money she could. As a girl, Debbie was straight-laced and heavily involved in Girl Scouts. She once proclaimed she wanted to die as a young Girl Scout, implying she would never give it up. With her family now living in Burbank, California, at the age of 16, Debbie decided to enter in a beauty pageant. She took home the crown and was titled Miss Burbank. Shortly after this, she was discovered and offered a contract with Warner Brothers, where the studio head would give Mary the new name she is known for today, Debbie Reynolds. She was known to really shine and love doing musicals, so when Warner Brothers made the decision to stop doing musicals altogether, she decided to move over to MGM. Debbie is most famously known for her role in the classic film Singing in the Rain, where she starred alongside Gene Kelly. This movie changed her career and put her in high demand. 4 years later, in 1952, Debbie did a film called Bundle of Joy, where she would work with co-star and singer Eddie Fisher. It seemed not only was there a connection on screen, but also off. The two became very close and would marry soon after in 1955. Debbie and Elizabeth remained friends throughout their career and would frequently keep in touch, but they would later become much closer. This was because Debbie's husband, Eddie Fisher, was friends with Elizabeth Taylor's husband, Mike Todd. So all four of them would begin to hang out frequently and become very close, doing everything together. Debbie considered Elizabeth to be one of her very closest friends and confided in her about everything. She even named her second child Todd in honor of their blossoming friendship. Everything would remain in a happy state until one evening, in the middle of the night, while Deb and Eddie were sleeping, they received a phone call from Elizabeth that would change everything. Elizabeth was wildly upset when she called, screaming and crying. Immediately, the couple got dressed and rushed to Elizabeth's home. This is when they learned that her husband, Mike Todd, had sadly passed away in a plane crash. Alone and inconsolable, Debbie soon realized that Elizabeth could not be left alone, as she was in an extremely bad way. Debbie wanted to be a good supportive friend and offered to take Elizabeth's children to her home. She told her husband Eddie to stay back with Elizabeth so that she had a support system. Eddie, of course, agreed, and Debbie left them alone for the night. I'm not entirely sure why Debbie made the decision to leave her husband with Elizabeth, but I'm guessing it is because 1, she was the one that had to take care of the children, and 2, she trusted her husband and probably didn't think anything of it. Debbie had only assumed that Eddie would stay for one night, maybe 2, and then he would come back home. The problem was that Eddie Fisher would never come back home at all, ever. Debbie started to become suspicious, but surely did not want to accuse anyone of anything, especially since her friend was going through a period of loss and trauma. When Eddie finally rang Debbie on the phone, he told her that he was called to New York for work and would be gone for a little while. Debbie took him at face value and carried on. That was until media rumors began to swirl. Rumors that exposed a secret, because Eddie Fisher was not alone in New York City. He decided to bring Elizabeth Taylor along with him. When Debbie found this out, she was shocked and floored. Her best friend and her husband were now seeing each other, and she was now left with all the pain that it caused. Although Debbie knew Elizabeth's background, she wholeheartedly believed that Elizabeth would never do this to her. Others disagreed. Miss Taylor was already on her 3rd husband by her early 20s and held a certain reputation of being a Maneater. Once Debbie finally spoke to Eddie, she tried to warn him instead of getting upset with him. She specifically told Eddie that Elizabeth would keep him around for only a while until she grew tired of him, and then it would be on to the next. When I say this story was one of the biggest scandals of the time, that doesn't even do it justice. It was huge. You could not turn a corner without seeing this smeared over magazine covers. It just exploded. Debbie couldn't even get through a standard interview without the affair being brought up, and this would continue later into her life. Both Debbie and Elizabeth's career would continue and were not in any way affected by everything that happened. However, Eddie Fisher was not so lucky. The entirety of his acting and singing career were now in shambles, and he would never recover. Debbie was correct about the fate of Eddie and Elizabeth's relationship. They only lasted a year and a half before calling it quits altogether. Elizabeth ended up cheating on Eddie with another man whom she'd met during the filming for the movie Cleopatra. The outside became so upset by Elizabeth Taylor's actions that they really wanted her to be held responsible. They assumed that Debbie would somehow get revenge, or would at the very least have some choice words for her, but Debbie never did. Year after year, she just continued to be mature and civilized about the matter and never said anything hateful or vengeful. I would say in the end, Debbie came out on top, as everyone came out to support her, and she also remarried. Many compared the affair to the more modern affair of Angelina Jolie, Brad Pitt, and Jennifer Aniston, which played out very similarly. In 1966, Debbie and Elizabeth would shockingly reconcile. By a mere coincidence, the two happened to run into each other while on board a cruise on the Queen Elizabeth. After Debbie got word that Elizabeth was on the ship with her, she decided to write her a letter requesting that the two meet up and finally hash this out. We do not know exactly what was said in that conversation, but it seems like the two just put responsibility on Eddie Fisher, and by the end of it, they had put their past to bed, buried the hatchet, and had become friends once again. So yeah, Debbie Reynolds is a better human than most would be. I don't know if I could do it. Once the dust had settled, Debbie did make a joke about the affair during interviews, and boy is she funny.
Place and not have any more pain. Because, if you love somebody, if you care for somebody, you want them to be well and not be unhappy. She loved life, and Elizabeth loved life, and I know because she took part of mine. And
That wasn't true, Debbie. Was this?
I'm completely over it.
The two friends would go on to star in a sitcom together and appeared publicly to support one another. When Elizabeth Taylor passed away from her health, Debbie would come out to the media to support her. At age 84, Debbie Reynolds would sadly pass away in Los Angeles, California, after tragically suffering from a stroke. This was a crazy story that luckily had a happy ending, but could have gone a completely different way if it weren't for Debbie's grace and her ability to forgive. She is a legend. That is going to be it for me today. Thanks again for watching, and do not forget to subscribe and like, and I will see you next time. Ciao.